Hey y'all, favorite family law attorney, Bonnie Roden with Roden Law Group in East Central Florida. This is video number 5 in the Equitable Distribution series. So if you're going through a divorce in Florida, you got to understand how marital assets and debts are divided. It's essential. What if you make a misstep along the way? What if your case involves unique situations like stock options, or you're legally separated but not divorced? In this video, we're diving into 5 key topics that you're going to want to understand. Common mistakes in equitable distribution, that's one. How Florida compares to other states that are community property states. 3 is how courts handle property distributions that are partial. We're also going to talk a little bit about what happens when you're separated. And then lastly, we're going to talk about RSUs and how they are divided in a divorce. So let's go. All right. Major pitfall in Florida divorces is failing to account for all the marital debt. While many people focus on dividing property, the marital liabilities, credit card balances, joint loans, even tax debts are equally important. Another mistake, overlooking hidden assets. If you don't investigate fully, you might leave some value on the table. This is especially true if one spouse controls most of the finances over the other. Other missteps are ignoring the tax consequences of dividing assets. Assuming a 50-50 split is guaranteed is not a good thing to do. You don't want to make that mistake. Or if you try to rush into a settlement without fully understanding the long-term impacts of all the provisions. You definitely, and you've heard me say it before, you've got to document, keep meticulous financial records. Insist on full disclosures when you're working in a high worth divorce, and consult other professionals that you might need, such as a forensic accountant or even just your CPA, also a tax attorney or another tax advisor. So definitely you want to document. All right, so how does Florida compare to community property states? Florida follows equitable distribution, not community property. I know, what's the difference? So here's the difference. Community property states, 2 of which are California and Texas, all assets and debts acquired during the marriage are split 50-50 by default. But in Florida, our law requires the courts to aim for fair, equitable, not necessarily equal. You've heard me say this before. Equitable does not mean equal. It means fair. So the judge will consider factors like the length of the marriage, each spouse's economic circumstances, and their contributions to the marriage. Good example is if one of you stayed home to raise children while the other built a career, Florida courts might give the stay-at-home spouse a greater share of retirement or business assets, especially if they have less earning power post-divorce. This happens a lot for stay-at-home parents. All right, what do we do about partial distributions? So partial distributions are rare but can happen in high conflict or financially complex divorces. Imagine the court is going to award one party certain assets early. Possibly a reason would be to ensure financial stability. And the court would then reserve a final decision on the other issues or the other assets and debts. In my experience, Florida courts are very cautious with this approach. Why? Because once a partial distribution is made, it may influence how the rest of all of the assets are handled. And the judge must ensure the final outcome is still fair overall. So that temporary distribution, if it's granted, is going to affect the overall distribution. So just a key point to keep in mind, if you're considering requesting or agreeing to a partial distribution, make sure it's part of a well thought out strategy, ideally with the advice of your experienced attorney. All right, equitable distribution and separation. So Florida does not formally recognize a legal separation. In Florida, you're either married or you're single. It's that easy. However, that doesn't really mean that you're without any legal options. Spouses can live separately and still file for what's called support unconnected with dissolution. and that is a companion type of action to a divorce. You're not planning to file divorce, but you need support, and the other spouse is withholding finances from you. You can file that. The few times that I've seen that used, typically the other party will then file for divorce, and away you go on the divorce train. However, you can start the divorce process and ask for that support while you're still legally married. From an equitable distribution standpoint, the timing of when property is acquired becomes more important. Generally, the courts use the date of filing for divorce when choosing the dividing line between what's marital and what's non-marital. So if you're separated, but nobody's filed anything for divorce, new assets or debts can still be considered marital. The courts have great discretion on this. All right, so let's talk just for a minute about stock options and RSUs. What are RSUs? RSUs are restricted stock units, and they can be a little tricky. They're usually awarded as part of employment packages or compensation packages, and their value may not be immediately available. So Florida courts consider whether the option or the RSU was earned during the marriage, and if so, it may be a marital asset, even if it hasn't been cashed in yet, even if it's not vested. So with a stock option or an RSU, the value in Florida, the court will often split that asset according to what's called the coverture formula, which calculates how much of that benefit is marital and how much of it is non-marital based on the timeline of the marriage and the vesting schedule and the award date. You may need a financial expert to help assign that value. Typically, a CPA can do that, or sometimes a quadro attorney can do that as well. So equitable distribution isn't always simple. These are just 5 topics in the series of, I think we have 10 videos in total. If you need help with your dissolution in Florida, happy to help you. Otherwise, I hope this information was helpful. Hit the like and the follow button, and you can keep up on when we have new content coming out. Bye.